Hi, everybody. My name is Ronald. I'm the co-founder of About Fraud, and I'm the host for this session today. Before we going into all the details about our topic of today and about our great panel, I would like to address one housekeeping rule, which is please be active. So on the right-hand side of your panel, you can see a chat box, and we can already see a good number of people using the chat box to say hello. Again, hello to everybody, but that's a chat box where you can make your comments, ask your questions, sharing any kind of thoughts which you have during the session. We want to keep this as lively as possible. In total, we have only 4 slides, including this cover slide here. So we're not going to bore you with slides. We want to have a very good discussion. And that's why also we have a good expert panel with us here today. So what we're going to talk about today, doing more with less. Many companies are in the risk and ops teams are facing resource constraints, budget, reduced budgets, hiring freezes, limited resources in general. And we need to challenge how to combat fraud in a more difficult environment. And everybody talks about GenAI. What is this? What can we do? What is happening next? But these are the topics which we are going to discuss today. And before going into even more details, let's see who's joining us today. So we have 3 gentlemen joining our session today. Let's start with Patrick. Patrick, who are you? What are you doing? And yeah, welcome, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald, and thank you to About Fraud and Inscribe for allowing the opportunity to talk about this interesting topic today. First off, I work for Rapid Finance. For those who aren't familiar with the company, we're an online financial services company who offers fast, flexible funding solutions to small and medium businesses in the United States. So pretty much what that means, we are offering, short-term working capital loans, merchant cash advances, and lines of credit that amortize over a 1-year period. And so for over the last two decades we're 19 years in business. We've provided more than $3 billion in funding to businesses in the United States. So which means we kind of have a lot of history that goes along with it. And, technology is a big component in what we do. In terms of me specifically, right, I have over a decade in the non-bank lending space. So call it fintech, call it alternative finance, a little bit in the payment space. And in my role as director of operations at Rapid Finance, I really get to work on a lot of interesting topics. But I think for the context of this conversation, I'll probably share the most pertinent ones here. So my core area of expertise and the true north in terms of where I return home to at the end of the day really comes down to underwriting and making sound risk decisions and supporting the team members and the technology team in making sure that we do a really good job at doing that. So I get to collaborate, both with all of our team members as well as our technology teams to figuring out solutions to a lot of complex problems. And one of those, is fighting fraud. Allows me to work with awesome vendors like Inscribe, who's kind of been one of my favorite vendors to work with of all time. And I guess also helps to have this extra context. I'm not a technologist by training, right? So I am very much risk decision, how to use the tools, how to optimize the tools, and how to work with our team members in doing that.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for being here today. Preston, your stage.
Hi there. My name is Preston Miller. I'm manager of fraud and chargeback at Airbase. We're a B2B SaaS company that does business spend management. So all your non-payroll spending and procurement can flow through our platform. And I was hired to create a fraud team. Anytime you move money, bad guys are going to look to steal it from you. My background is I'm actually here because I used to catch shoplifters at Target in college. I was there and then got a taste of investigations, moved over to the Navy Exchange. It's a system of stores on Navy bases around the world. Did that for a few years, learned a lot, had a great time doing that. Moved into banking and was a fraud investigator, then moved out to another credit union in Texas, and I built their fraud department, scaled that from 0 to 1. And then joined Airbase in 2022 and having a great time here. So we are, like I said, business spend management. So we run accounts payable, corporate credit cards. We have a procurement function, advanced approvals. We're really aimed at the office of the CFO and the procurement personas at different companies. My team is responsible for making sure the about $6 billion that we move every year goes to where it's supposed to be heading, and to make, like he said, sound risk decisions on all of those transactions.
Thanks, Preston, for being here today. Last but not least, Derek, your stage.
Thanks, Ronald. Yeah, hey everyone. Very excited to be part of the panel here today. My name is Darragh McNeil. I'm based out of Dublin, Ireland. As for the chat, I love that it seems we have a very international group joining us today. I'm a senior fraud analyst here at Inscribe. Inscribe is an AI-powered risk intelligence platform that helps organizations like Rapid Finance and Airbase identify trustworthy and creditworthy customers. On me personally, I'm a qualified financial advisor initially. I'm a member of the Institute of Bankers here in Ireland, as well as the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I developed a passion for fighting fraud after working in the credit risk and underwriting processes at multiple financial institutions prior to working here at Inscribe, which includes Home, which is Ireland's leading BNPL provider. And before that, I also worked several roles in ME Bank and Great Southern Bank, which is based in Melbourne, Australia. But yeah, very excited to be here and always super excited to talk all things fraud.
Thanks, Derek, for being here today. So I think the audience is now happy with our panel. So we have a really broad range of experts who already have seen a lot, who are touching different type of risk and fraud topics. And we also know they are quite innovative in what they do and how they do it. And that's a big part of our discussion today. But let's start with what are the emerging fraud risks which we see? So what are the fraud approaches you have seen in your organization? What are maybe the topics which are on your radar right now? So what are really the hot topics which you see? Maybe Preston starts with a short overview of what is really keeping you up right now and your team.
Yeah, I don't sleep well anyway, but a lot of the things we're seeing, the emergence technologies we're seeing are making it even worse. So one of the biggest changes I've seen is that a lot of businesses used to treat fraud and fraud losses as just the cost of doing business. It was a part of it. You just were going to accept that you were going to take a hit, whether depending on industry that was under 1%, or you were measuring in bips, or some industries you were measuring, 5, 10, 15, 20% losses. Today, that's not true. There are shrinking margins everywhere, and businesses are looking to find efficiencies and cut down on those losses. So we're seeing a lot more interest in fraud from areas that we didn't normally see it, right? The office of the CFO is now asking questions about what are your fraud management strategies? How are you adapting to the macro environment when it comes to fraud risks? How are you approaching the threat of GenAI? They're also worried more about cash management. We're getting questions about FDIC insurance and sweep accounts that were not common 5 years ago. So there are a lot of big worries that people have. There's some highly publicized fraud incidents that are making a lot of leaders very nervous, right? We have the big FTX case that happened, and we've got the $25 million case out of Hong Kong where the GenAI was used to create fake avatars of the entire board of directors of a company to authorize a $25 million payment. So we're seeing a lot of the high-tech attempts, but a lot of the same methodologies follow. They're, at the end of the day, con man means confidence, and it's finding a way to gain the confidence of your mark and to get that money out. One of the other things I'll point out too, as far as larger, bigger picture issues, is payment rails are shifting. Customers and businesses now expect money to move faster and faster. Every day we get more and more calls to move from the legacy ACH system, which has been around for decades, and move to 2-day, 1-day, same day, real-time payment methods. And while it's great to move money faster, it's the bad guys think the same way. And so we're going to see a lot more risks as we see those rails evolve. The liability shifts are different, the compliance needs are different, and we're going to just see that acceleration continue.
But I think also, Preston, on your side, is an interesting perspective because you offering the service B2B. That means the risk and fraud component becomes potentially also a differentiator and hopefully also USP, how you're dealing with these topics in comparison to others.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of fintechs and other service providers need to understand, is that your fraud prevention tactics, or having a fraud prevention component of your company, is table stakes at this point. You have to have some sort of fraud control mechanism, and the better it is, the better your fraud control mechanism, the better a differentiator it is for you. So it used to be that fraud, risk, loss prevention teams, they were the ones saying no, and they were kind of isolated, they were compartmentalized, they had a separate reporting structure, usually to a supervisory committee. But now I'm finding that some of the most impactful work that I do in risk management comes from working with my marketing team, working with the go-to-market team, the sales team. We're having to be a lot more collaborative and cross-functional than we were a long time ago, and it's just helping build that differentiation that we bake this into our DNA, and that's something we do at Airbase. Is we have baked risk management into our DNA, from the smallest feature all the way up to the major strategic initiatives. We're a part of it. We have a seat at the table. And that's something that didn't happen a decade ago.
Thanks, Preston, for this intro, for this kind of kickoff. I think that's, again, interesting perspective. And I think Patrick will come from a different angle with his main topics, which keeps him up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Preston, I echo all your thoughts, right? I think generative AI and the things that people are able to pull off now, it's scary, definitely keeps you up at night. But I'm gonna go with a really granular approach, what I'm seeing at the application level that's coming through. And I kind of think these have been a really interesting 4 years now, right? 4 years ago, I think we all had the world shut down, had a whole bunch of different things happen depending on where you are in the world. And if you had asked me this question a couple of months ago, I would say you would find me lurking in a lot of spaces, kind of seeing what fraudsters were doing to ramp that up. But kind of what I've noticed over the past 2 years is less and less people stealing information, stealing identities, coming to apply with us at mass. And what I'm really seeing is a lot of pressures hit a lot of business owners and consumers in a lot different way, where they're going to take actions that they might not have before, right? We think a lot of stuff that went on in the United States, like business owners were flooded with money back in 2020. They've probably burned through all that, right? You have right now credit card delinquency. You could go to a number of different sources and see that delinquency rates are probably the highest they've ever been, or at least for 15 years or so. We see interest rates higher than ever. We see banks pulling back their lending. So what we're seeing right now, interestingly, is an increase in firsthand fraud. And these, what I mean by that is these are clients where we're pretty confident that we know them from a KYC and a KYB perspective, even to the point where they're an existing client or a prior client who's had a positive repayment history with us on a loan or an MCA or a line of credit. And they're coming back and they're altering documents along the way. They're trying to conceal information. They're trying to conceal that they got another source of financing. They're trying to conceal that, well, I'm bouncing payments to this other financing provider, and that might be a part of your risk decision. And on top of that, it's just getting better, right? That generative AI, like the methods that are being used, it's getting harder and harder to detect with the naked eye. And I think anybody who's in my space right now is going to need an AI solution to kind of at least provide that initial scan if they want a chance of, surviving through what's coming down the road, right? We've kind of only seen the beginning of it.
I like to joke that anymore we're going to just have AIs fighting each other. We're going to have a good AI fighting the bad AI, and we'll just have to stand on the sidelines and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And also, when we prepared for this call, I think Preston had a good, very sharp definition about first-party fraud. Because we talked about this, and then Preston jumped in, hey, that's how we define it internally. I think maybe that's a good one, Preston, to share for the audience.
Yeah, just first-party fraud is either someone who is your customer or claims to be your customer is using your system as a customer. Right, and that's one of those things you have to do early on when you're looking at risk management of an organization, is set those definitions. So yeah, somebody who is your customer, is pretending to be your customer, or is using your system as a customer would, is what I would consider first party.
Thanks, Preston. Good. Derek, from your point of view, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of different type of companies, maybe also sharing your thoughts right now. Derek, what are the topics which you see most pressing right now?
Yeah, from our perspective, obviously we have different use cases and different organizations that utilize our service. What we tend to do every year is we conduct an extensive review of all of our customers and all of the documents that we analyze. And we use those learnings combined with a survey of risk and ops leaders to compile our annual document fraud report. So I think a few of the points within that would be good to highlight now. First, obviously, as we know, just during tougher economic conditions, businesses often go through big changes like new regs, shifts in markets, internal rule changes. If we use an external factor like the increase of interest rates recently, that means the cost of borrowing obviously increases too, which makes it more challenging for some consumers to be approved for financial products that they possibly or probably would have previously been eligible for. So similar to what Patrick just mentioned, these changes can make people slightly more desperate, can give fraudsters a chance to exploit weaknesses in the system as well that are easy to manipulate when companies cut budgets as well or downsize staff. So on the report itself, we found that 80% of risk leaders noticed more fraud attempts in 2023 than the same time the previous year. And within that, then only, I think, 42% had a way to spot fraud in the documents that they relied heavily on. So from my perspective, I think having a solution to help you detect fraud is really important here, especially given difficult economic times when fraud almost certainly increases traditionally. Secondly, on a similar theme in terms of economic slowdowns, again, like Patrick and Preston just spoke of, even customers who previously vetted may still alter their documentation to get approved for whether it be higher loan amounts or increased credit limits. Like I touched on above just previously, consumers can oftentimes become more inclined to alter certain information then based on changes to their personal circumstances or external factors. So in the report, we found that about 60% of fraudulent personal loan applications we did see, and 46% of fraudulent SMB loan applications we saw showed signs of first-party fraud, which means they made alterations to their financial details. So from our perspective, I think it's really important that income verification alongside the name and address verification, which is obviously a requirement, is still very vital for mitigating fraud and potential credit losses. And that goes for even customers who previously approved and vetted. I'd say thirdly then, from my perspective, and the report itself, fraudsters are increasingly turning to document templates, which is becoming a huge business. Document templates are made to look totally legit and are easily bought and sold online. So after the webinar now, if anyone searches the web for fake bank statements or fake pay stubs, you're going to get thousands of results instantly. So within that, we found that fake bank statement templates, increased by almost 70% on the previous year, and fake pay stub templates jumped by over 500%, which is obviously a huge spike and pretty alarming. So traditionally, some of the less savvy fraudsters might use basic editing software to tweak documents. These templates are designed to be easily editable and look almost identical to the real deal. So it makes it really, really, really difficult for a human eye to detect at times. Again, like the two guys just mentioned, I did want to touch on the rise of GenAI. Obviously, it's very much an emerging fraud risk. And it makes all of the above things I just mentioned even more accessible. So GenAI definitely is going to help fraudsters create sophisticated fake documents in very large quantities at an extremely quick pace too. So I think it makes it really important to work with a vendor that can detect generative AI, like Inscribe, like ourselves here.
Just want to pick a few points. I mean, one topic for the audience, Darek mentioned now a lot of different numbers. Don't worry, we're going to share the numbers with you guys. So you did not miss all the details. At the end of the session, we're going to share with you the report as a document, so you can go through and checking out all the statistics, all the numbers, all the trends. But the other point is you also mentioned first-party fraud. So that's also reflecting what Patrick mentioned before. And maybe one question, Patrick. So if you realize that one of your existing customers, where you already did business for a while, turning into doing first-party fraud, would you just, I don't know if you can share this, but would you just block this one transaction, or would you really stop doing business with this customer because now he turned into doing bad behavior for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's a really interesting conundrum, right? Because typically when a client's coming to us, they're getting a loan or an MCA, has a payback term of 18 months. They may come back to refinance that, right? And so if we typically run into a situation where, yeah, we can tell they've definitively altered something in a way to deceive us, yeah, we're not going to refinance that. We're probably not going to do business with them again. But I think the tricky part for us is they might have an outstanding balance. How do you massage that message as you decline them and never consider them again, essentially, right? I mean, at that point, it's a slippery slope. Once you do that, like, what else are you willing to do? Like, your character is pretty much blown at that point.
Especially with the MCA topic, you have some historical data, but you don't really know how the trend is going for the future. We touched a few times the topic about GenAI, and that's maybe a good topic to also ask the audience. So are you actually preparing for GenAI fraud or any attempts? And again, we talk about this, but how do you prepare? So what do we do? So how does it really impact my business? And maybe until we get the feedback, maybe Preston maybe can give us a short point from his side. I mean, you also touched this topic, GenAI, but is it really a topic where you do specific brainstorming with the team? So how could GenAI impact in our business? I mean, especially in your business, B2B and documents and fake invoices and all these fake emails from different people. So is this really something where you're going to sit down and see how's this happening over time, or is this more like one out of many topics and it's daily business?
I see it as one of many threats out there. It is the newest one. It's the latest and greatest. I joked before this webinar that we probably should have a drinking game where you take a shot every time we say AI, because it's the hot topic right now. And yeah, it's scary. It's amazing. This is a technological breakthrough that we haven't seen in decades. But at the end of the day, the fraud vectors are still going to be pretty similar. It's really the methodology. It's more of a force multiplier, in my view, that you're going to have somebody without technical training, without the specialized equipment, but they have access to an LLM, and then they're able to use that to create something a lot more convincing than they would have been able to do, right? It doesn't take advanced Photoshop skills like it did in the past to create a fake bank statement. Now you've got this, helper. Like someone said about AI, that it's like a really brilliant intern who just sometimes misses the mark completely and has zero social skills. So sometimes it can be very, very helpful for the fraudsters. For me, that's one of the reasons that I choose partners who understand that and who can give me those tools to help detect these kinds of attacks. Right? The build versus buy question is at an organizational level, especially in the tech world, right? Are you going to build it in-house, or are you just going to find a partner who does it already? So we've mentioned Inscribe a few times, and that's one of our partners we use, where they are the experts on automating document reviews and to find those documents that have been modified. They have whole teams of people like Dara who spend all day, every day, figuring out how to attack this one specific vector. And frankly, I don't have time for that. So in this case, I have to outsource it a little bit. I have to get those experts on my side helping me out. So we're looking at it. We're finding the right partners. We're setting up processes and controls to even prevent it in the first place. And that's always my advice too, is if you can stop it from happening in the first place, it's a lot better than trying to respond when you're in the middle of a fraud attack.
Sure, because then it's panic mode. So you need to take immediate actions, and maybe it's not always the best action. We got one question from Jim. Thanks for this, Jim. Maybe that's a good question back to my question, which I asked before to Patrick. So Patrick, if you actually say to this one customer, whatever this statement is, that you cannot do this refinancing, do you tell the customer why you not keep doing business, or is it more like a very general answer that we cannot serve a request and that's it?
Yeah, it's typically caressed along the way, right? It's dropping the fraud bomb out there in terms of a client application process. That's a difficult one to go out there, but I can imagine there's going to be a lot of scenarios where they can kind of read between the lines in terms of the information that gets conveyed. A lot of these people, they're knowing what they're doing, and they got caught. And most of the time, there's not much pushback. There hasn't, been really any instance where we've declined for that reason. We've ended up having like any feedback come through BBB or any other various regulatory, agencies that somebody could go complain to. So short answer, no, but they know why.
Okay. And let's look back at the poll. So we asked the question, are you actually prepared for any kind of GenAI attempts or fraud attempts? And 50% said, I'm not sure what to do. Again, interesting. 36% said yes, I'm prepared. We did not ask to which extent, but I'm prepared. And 14% said no. Again, like Preston mentioned, it's one topic out of many. It's just maybe the hot topic right now, but there are many other topics. So that's why it's good that we talk about this. And that also leads us maybe to the next area of questions. So now we talked about a subset of topics which keeping us up at night. But what are actually to do with our limited resources? I'm not sure if Patrick or Preston had this kind of challenges in the last months or years, that you had more constraints on resources than you had before. But what are actually the right ways of approaching this? Maybe Patrick first. If you have limited resources in all kind of different areas in the organization, so how can you really keep up with the never-ending creative type of fraudsters who are trying to get money out of your organization or your customers?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Budget obviously comes to mind. That's going to be a concern on any organization. When we think about this problem, right? Even if you had unlimited money, right? You don't have unlimited time, and you don't have unlimited human capital to implement all the solutions. So you can afford everything in the world money-wise. It's still going to take time to implement them all, right? So I think it really comes down taking a look organizationally, understanding your technological capabilities, and really trying to figure out how you take advantage of the machine resources and the human resources that you have available. And so generally, I like to think about these problems from taking a look at what are your repetitive tasks? What are your pain points? What are your error-prone tasks, right? I think about fraudulent bank statements and spotting a fraudulent document, right? The error rate that a human would have, it was high before folks became sophisticated at creating really good fake documents. It's even higher now because they're starting to get really good, right? So really taking a look at, all right, what are those true pain points? What are those, really going through that, identifying what your low-hanging fruit is and figure out, hey, is there a technological solution that would be easy to implement, even if it's, manual at first? Right. So for instance, with Inscribe, a few years back when we started working with them, right, we had already had like a number of, things where the machine was helping us out, become a little bit more efficient. How we went about doing that is like, all right, we went with a provider that had an easy to use interface where we could just take a document and say, hey, something looks off. Somebody could easily go into a portal and look at it and get some insights and kind of have a helping hand, even if it was manual and even if it took a little bit of time, it still ultimately was a gain, right? And, really just going through, that's opportunity one. Another one might be like, hey, I'm entering in a whole bunch of manual information from bank statements to figure out, hey, how much is this business depositing a month? How many NSFs do they have? What sort of other lenders are there? Right? Those are things that a machine can do more reliably, than a human if you teach it to do it right. But honestly, as much as you do it, I think organizationally, you just kind of have to foster a culture where this stuff is talked about in the open. And I'll kind of focus on fraud, right? Our organization, we talk about fraud openly, right? We have a strong culture to begin with. We address it out in the open. We have a Slack workspace that's available to most of our folks in operations and sales, where we talk about this stuff. We talk about our underwriting guidelines and how they apply to certain deals. We have a channel called Suspected Fraud. Something looks off on this bank statement, or we got this result. Can you check for a false positive? It could be any number of topics that go in there, but make sure that we, talk about things and we don't hide it behind a curtain and make sure it's a mystery in terms of what's going on. It's there for anybody in our organization to go access and, learn something. Right. And I think it's also key that when you implement these tools, you're taking the time to train your team members, making sure they're knowledgeable, making sure they're involved in the process and how to use it, making sure they're involved in the feedback process. Like, hey, I'm noticing this is off. Like, we need to improve this. Right. And then when things do go wrong, because things will go wrong, whether it's a human mistake or a machine mistake, making sure there's some sort of blameless postmortem review process that goes on. Right. You have to be humble enough to take a look at what went wrong when the deal goes bad and a fraudster burns you, and talk about it in a way where, the people aren't going to feel, threatened. Obviously you don't want to have that happen a whole bunch of times, but you honestly need to just be able to do that and be honest with yourselves and figure out the solutions and adapt after it goes wrong.
I'm just interested, maybe the audience maybe can make a shout if anyone else in the audience also using a Slack channel internally to just really talk about this openly. I think that's something which I haven't heard that often. Often the ops teams are still working in silos, and not everybody's really trying to be present, as Patrick just mentioned, really trying to involve a lot of different teams. But again, it depends on the type of business you do. It's more essential than in other companies. Thanks, Patrick, for sharing this. Preston, anything specific on your side where you feel these are maybe good learnings which you can share, or low-hanging fruits, or any kind of great ideas, how you get the most out of the resources which you have available?
I can promise ideas. I don't know about the adjective before that. So the main thing I can tell you is communicate. That is the number one thing. I like how Patrick's doing it with Slack. For those organizations who don't use Slack and are more email heavy, I've found that to be extremely helpful to just publicize those wins. But the other part of it that's really uncomfortable, especially for some of the previous generations of risk management leaders, is you have to publicize your losses too. So what I always tell people is publicize your wins and identify the people who help prevent them, help stop them, help respond to it. Identify those people, celebrate them, get that out in front of your entire organization. And the same applies for those losses, but don't talk about the people. Talk about what could have been done differently, what we're doing to respond to this, but don't get the individuals involved in it. I have scaled fraud teams from 0 to 1, and fun example actually just happened over the weekend. I stopped at the credit union, one of the branches of the credit union where I built their fraud department. And I just casually mentioned that I used to work there. And she said, "Oh, you did? What did you do?" I said, "Oh, I built the fraud team." And she said, "Oh, you're Preston with those emails?" I haven't worked there in almost 2 years, but my emails went out to the whole company. I made them fun, engaging. I added memes and jokes, and I poked fun at myself and my team. And I made sure to start the conversation about fraud and make it interesting. Because frankly, as a guy who was in the compliance department at a financial institution, compliance and risk management can be very uninteresting to a lot of people. But if you start talking about catching bad guys and preventing that customer from losing their life savings, all of a sudden people get excited rather than just sitting there and telling them, "Oh, well, we're trending down this year. We're 3 bips lower than where we were last quarter." No one, let's be real, no one really is going to worry about that too much. You want to tell the story. And so I always tried to get out, tell the story about it, and it's got to start at the top. I've got to get the CEO and the C-suite telling that story all the way down to the teller. This teller I've never met in my life was so excited because she found out who the guy was behind these crazy emails that actually used to clog up our Outlook server and get IT mad at me. So what I'll tell you, the biggest things to do when you're coming in, especially from my perspective of that scaling from 0 to 1, is you got to identify the problem. I like to tease my previous boss, that same credit union, that she lied to me during my interview. I said, "How bad's the fraud here?" "Oh, it's not too bad." And I got there, and within weeks I said, "No, it's real bad, but you guys haven't understood it. You haven't defined it." And so the other thing is you have to define your risk thresholds. What is your risk tolerance? What are you willing to lose and what are you willing to keep? Because we are not the remove all risk from everything forever department. We are the risk management department. We will manage it. So every company is going to have their own risk tolerance. You're going to have to find that definition for your organization and figure out how to set up the next step for me, which is your low-hanging fruit. Find those areas where you can just look at it with a fresh set of eyes and say, why are we doing it this way? And if people, you've got to ask why. And if someone says, well, it's because we've always done it this way, you might want to carry a little pocket full of plastic dinosaurs and just hand them one, because that's what you sound like when you say we've always done it this way. Never settle for that. Always be looking for a way to improve everything, from even the smallest little tasks all the way up to some of your major strategic initiatives. And the couple other things that I find really important in this, you know, fighting fraud with limited resources. So think like a bad guy. And I empower my team to do the same. I tell them, go try to steal from us. Add some supervision, add some controls. But I was able to reach into our CEO's personal account at a previous job, reach into his, sorry, Tejo, not your account, I promise. At a previous role, I was able to bypass controls, reach into the CEO's personal account and pull money out into a third-party account, and they couldn't find the trace in the system because I've found a way to act like a bad guy. It was fixed within hours, but I was able to find it. So always empower your team to think like a bad guy, try to take action like a bad guy. And the last piece of that is empower your team. If you have a risk management team, give them the ability to act. If you have to make them wait on approvals, long turnaround times, you've got to get sign off from all these people before they take these actions that are inherent to their day-to-day job, they're not going to be effective. They're not going to be able to stop fraud, and you're not going to be able to fulfill your organization's mission to you, which is manage the risk to the company.
I think that's an interesting point, Preston, regarding acting like a bad guy. I mean, some organizations have internal hackathons, where they're just trying to really be creative over the weekend and with a lot of pizzas, to really just trying to act like a really bad person and trying to get into different systems. But maybe one question here, how would you recommend to get started with this? Would you just get top-level management approval and just telling a story that we need to do this? Or would you just tell your team, so next week, Monday, you are now bad guy number 1, and 1 week later, you number 2, and please provide us insights, what you have done? Or how would you get started in doing such activities with the team?
One of my mentors in my career, one of the most impactful mentors I've ever had, introduced me to a guy who does red teaming for the military. And it's not just red teaming in the sense, like, we're all mostly here tech companies. We assume red teaming is digital, it's hacking. No, he's like jumping fences and stealing Humvees with government authorization on US military bases. And so that's one of those where the leadership knows, hey, this is going to happen at some point, and they've signed off on the overall concept, but you don't want to warn them. And so that's something that I like to do, is just say, hey, here are some of the things we're going to do. If I'll be monitoring it, I'll be letting you know, here are some, we are not going to do X, Y, Z. We set those guidelines and guardrails. We're not going to actually move funds in this case, but we're going to show that we had the opportunity to do it. So set those guardrails, make sure you get senior leadership buy-in, but then turn your team loose. If you sit and prescribe every action by your team, you're not going to see the creativity inherent to every individual. So I always try to get the big picture approval and then just turn them loose and see what happens, because you'll be amazed at what some of your employees will come up with.
Thanks, Preston. And also, we have seen a comment from Samantha, thanks for this, that she also doing Halloween cybersecurity emails, and I think that's a good one. That actually really engaging with your audience, engaging with the team, engaging with the whole organization in a more interesting way, instead of explaining we now moved 3 bips up or down, but just maybe telling a story. I think also Derek has here some things to share, how you would approach this, Derek, or any kind of hints or suggestions from your side for the audience, how to manage fraud with limited resources.
Yeah, I love what Patrick and Preston both just spoke of. I'd reiterate the importance of top-down measures in relation to dealing with fraud within an organization. I think it's crucial as well that leadership prioritizes fraud prevention from the top down, because then it establishes a culture of vigilance and sets the tone for the entire organization. On the limited budget specifically, I'll reference another recent report that I read from the ACFE, who published, I think, their anti-fraud benchmarking report a couple of months back. That budget restrictions, I think, were the top concern of over 80% of the organizations they spoke to. So it is definitely top of mind for a lot of industry leaders. So yeah, for those with tight budgets, there are a few things you could probably consider to keep your defenses strong in terms of using external help in particular. So firstly, I'd say is talk to your existing solution providers. I think working closely with your solution provider is a huge benefit to both parties. Hopefully Patrick and Preston here agree. But yeah, you could ask simple questions. Are there features in your existing plans that you're not currently leveraging that you could be doing? There could also be features that are behind beta that you could start using. Oftentimes you can use features in early development for free or for a limited period in exchange for feedback. So vendors definitely value that too, and it works with both ways. I would say secondly, then, if you're looking for a new solution provider from scratch, as Patrick mentioned earlier, looking for a vendor with low code or no code options is always the preference. If they have a user-friendly web app, you can start using it straight away and not having to rely on engineering resources that are often tough to come by. And then lastly, I would say consider any current tasks that are being done by human teams that could possibly be automated with AI. And this is definitely a way to free up your team's time to focus on more complex problems without the issues of having to add additional headcount. So those are kind of three areas that I think would help in terms of limited budgets and trying to expand your prevention measures.
Thanks, Derek. I mean, we not touched again this word AI again and again, but maybe also using this besides to what we already mentioned with using potentially a provider using AI to for certain purposes. Is there anything, Patrick, from your side where you see that you as an organization could use AI to really building a better defense against fraud attacks, or is there anything what you see maybe down the road where you also could apply AI instead of just seeing that the fraudsters using AI?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Interesting question that think through here a little bit, because we've been taking measures for a while now. We're a relatively mature organization, so we've kind of seen over a number of years that we've leveraged it in certain ways. Starting from predictive risk scores, taking all sorts of things in attributes of an application, things that are present, in credit reports and various other sources and documents they provide us. So we've certainly used predictive risk modeling. We've certainly already used Inscribe to help with fraudulent document detection. We have other vendors who we have in place who will give us a good likelihood of whether or not the client is who they say they are, whether that business exists, whether that person likely owns it. I think certainly an immediate next opportunity, and it's definitely something we do a pretty good job of addressing and continually addressing, is like, all right, well, how do you tie multiple other tools together and kind of do it in a seamless way where the machine does a lot of the work for you and they kind of just serve up on the platter like, hey, here's a couple of things I wasn't sure on, kind of have a human take a look. So for instance, if you have information coming from 5-6 different sources, maybe they're confident on 4 of those sources and the human won't need to look at it, and all they really need to do in their review is take a look at those 2 things that couldn't quite be resolved by whatever interpreter that you have on top of those tools. And so I think that's probably the immediate next big step that I can think of.
Okay, thanks for this outlook. Again, it's always sharing ideas, creating awareness about certain elements, and of course, every company, organization would need to adapt this to what they need. But that's why we are here today, giving some ideas or giving some solutions which we have implemented already, and hopefully one or another maybe can pick up something. And I can see Preston's very active in the chat, and we're going to one topic later. I think there's an interesting one regarding the fraud library, but also the question to you, Preston. Is there anything right now where you see AI for specific use cases that you could really leverage internally to really step up and building more defense for your own use cases?
So right now, the most accessible way for businesses and leaders to leverage AI is simply to just push some low value work to it. An example of that is, do I really need my entire team of 5 to all know how SQL works and how to write those queries? I would rather that they be able to just go into the system, go to an AI tool and ask the question in natural language and get the answer back. So pushing some of that low value work has been one of the biggest things. You know, do you really need to set up these complex yes, no operators for, say, a KYC onboarding system? I used one recently, and I likened their visual diagram of the decision tree. It was a bowl of spaghetti, right? There were like 16 different decision points that flowed into each other. And at the end of the day, yes, I can sit and understand that, but I'm going to have to sit there and map it out by hand. I'm going to have to change. It's going to take me a long time. When instead, if I have a powerful enough LLM, I can just push it over to that and say, find out what this looks like historically. Do you have any recommendations for it? And I think that's where a lot of the service providers, fraud risk management and otherwise, are going to have to really leverage AI. Everyone here on this call, I don't even care what kind of company you work for, everyone here on this call has more data than they know what to do with. There is a ton of information out there. I mean, literal petabytes of data just floating around that we as humans just don't have the capacity to understand. So I think that once we push the low value stuff over, then we're going to have to move to some of these large data set analyses by these tools. So specific to fraud and risk management, rule tuning is a big one for me. I get deep into the operations side. I'm always looking for efficiencies. And if my fraud detection system is looking at hundreds of data points with every single session that it pushes into my team's queue, it's looking at hundreds of data points. I can give you a good idea based on this, but it's going to take me a lot longer than it's going to take some of these tools to go through and make a good decision. That also goes back to training. You can't just take it out of the box and take the answers as is. You're going to have to spend some time training it. So it's a big question. It's a big answer. There's a lot of moving parts to this, but I really think that pushing your partners to use it to help you understand your data, using it internally to help understand your own data, and then also knowing that at this point in the AI world and its level of development, you're probably going to want to have a human in the loop still before you let it start running wild and making decisions that impact customers. That's been something drilled into me from the very beginning of my career, is without customers, you don't have a business. And so if you don't keep your customers central to your efforts, then you're not going to be around much longer. So anytime there's a customer impacting decision in front of me or my team, I expect them to take a holistic view of that customer and a thoughtful view of it and make the best decision based on that relationship, based on business needs. And at this point, that's not something an AI tool can do yet.
Yeah. So Preston, you bring up a good point. You know, you can implement a solution, but how you end up displaying that to your user base, internal users who are making these decisions, I think is key, right? That's something that you said right in the middle there. And that vendor you talk about, like, obviously we're not going to get in specifics, but I remember having a conversation recently when evaluating a vendor recently. It's like, that's great. You gave me all the information. Now, what do I do with it? What does it really mean? I think whatever solution you need to implement, like, you need to make sure you're involving those team members and figuring out how is it going to be useful to them? Like, how can I see what's going on really easy? Is this a likely yes, or is it a likely no? Is this something I'm going to have to introduce a lot of friction on or not? And then making sure you have the procedures in place around it to support whatever action that they're going to take.
Yeah, but again, also that very depends on the organization. Some like black and white feedback, it's good or bad. Some want to have a score, some want to have all the data. But of course, this depends on how your infrastructure looks like and on the capabilities which you have to really import and use this data in the right way. Because Press mentioned before, all of us have a lot of data, but most likely we're just using a subset of this data to make decisions. So that's why often more data doesn't really help to do better decisions because we're not using it. So that's why it very depends on how mature your organization is. But let's go back to Derek. He also has a good example with AI agents. I think that's also an interesting topic to get to the audience. And then we have a couple of questions, and we're also getting close to the hour. So Derek, please share your thoughts, and then we have enough time for a good Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks, Ronald. Yeah, I fully agree with both with what the guys just said there. But from our perspective and my perspective, I feel strongly. I think that AI agents are going to be the future of many aspects of work, and especially some operational work. So again, if you aren't too overly familiar with the idea of AI agents, you might initially think they're similar to chatbots, which are super common now, but they're very much more than that. So the idea is that they can read, write, and reason like humans. So the way I see it playing out is that they can act as autonomous teammates that will use the same software apps, the same websites, prioritize tasks in the same way as your team currently do. At the same time, they can run thousands of checks in parallel, kind of 24 hours a day. So, but very much like Preston mentioned, I think a really important point here is that the AI agent idea isn't intended to replace risk teams. They can't and probably shouldn't for the foreseeable future. I think instead they're meant to help your teams try to operate at a superhuman level, if at all possible, in terms of productivity and speed. And I think that's by automating mundane and repetitive tasks where at all possible. So using that method, I think, will allow risk teams to focus on more complex gray area problems that probably require a bit of a deeper investigation. But yeah, in terms of the risk teams themselves that do harness the power of AI, I think they stand to benefit hugely. And yeah, there's honestly countless ways I think an AI agent could transform the way risk teams work in the foreseeable future, in the very near future. Ideas being like they could perform due diligence checks, like proof of employment, proof of address, even do transaction fraud analysis, performing manual follow-up tasks, perform KYB checks, proof of incorporation, proof of business description, all these kind of easily automatable tasks when you see and compare the power of certain AI now in today's market. An important thing I think as well that they'll be able to do is conduct ongoing monitoring and risk assessments on onboard customers, and that's both of the first-party fraud that we mentioned earlier in the webinar too. It's important to keep tabs on current customers and not just new onboard customers. So if they identify, for example, risk levels for existing customers that change, whether it be on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, they could triage follow-up, for example. But yeah, from our perspective, over the last several months, we've talked to lots of prospects and lots of customers who are really trying to understand how to incorporate AI into their organization, but are kind of unsure where to begin in some cases, which, as the poll suggests here, might be the case for some of the organizations that are attending here now. But yeah, from our perspective at Inscribe, we're happy to see where opportunities exist within your team. So whether it's using the AI agent to detect fraud specifically, or just deploying AI agents more generally across your teams, just definitely an avenue where you could help your team in general.
Thanks, Derek. And I also like the example which Preston brought up regarding SQL. I think in the past, a lot of fraud analysts had one key skill. It was SQL, often very technical profiles. And of course, if we have the framework to enable everybody to become an SQL expert because we provide the right interface, and the machine behind the scene is doing all the technical stuff, then of course we're getting more efficient. We hopefully have a bigger resource pool, because then we can skip the requirement of being an SQL expert. But again, this is only one use case. And again, here a short pull to everybody regarding the AI agents. I think it's just interesting to understand in which extent are you using this right now. Would you like to see a demo because you have no idea what it is? Or is this maybe just something in general to learn more about? Or is it something which you're planning right now? Or again, if you have a minute, just click the button to share your point of view. I think, again, it's a big topic where some organizations are ahead of the curve, but many organizations still trying to find out what are my use cases, so how I could really apply, or what are maybe the low-hanging fruits to test the value. But again, here it's good to get a general sense how far we as an ecosystem right now. We have roughly 4 minutes left, so we're really running fast here. So I just would like to maybe, Patrick, if you see any question from the audience or any comments which you made, just maybe to highlight or to just take out and getting another comment from your side, please do this. And also afterwards, Preston, I think we got a lot of questions. Thanks again to all of us to really provide feedback. But maybe one question, Patrick, which you pick up to give some extra thoughts.
Yeah, you know, there's an interesting exchange that I think all three of us are going back and forth on with Alexandra out there. I'm trying to find the initial question of this. So how do you make sure you do not compromise compliance when using LLMs? And this is an interesting one because compliance is going to mean different things to different companies. It means different things to a bank, for instance, than it does to me. I don't work for a bank. We're a non-bank financing company. We certainly make sure we do the right things. We certainly have individual states where we need to comply with. We certainly have laws we need to comply with. Right, in LLM, it really depends on how you're going to define it. But if you're thinking about it from a Chat GPT perspective, I think a lot of companies, honestly, they're going to have to wrestle with a lot of decisions on it, right? I think some of the news stories that are out there would kind of say like, hey, the old school way of doing things and researching things, you go out and do Google, you're going to get the lies that tons of people have put out there, right? These LLMs, they can go down a route where they will confidently just make up their own lies and be very convincing about it. So, and sometimes it's not always really clear. So from my perspective, I'm going to talk about vendors we work with and not get into the Chat GPT realm. You need to make sure that you're working with reputable vendors. You need to make sure your folks are trained on them. You need to make sure you're able to easily display how you came to the determination that you did, right? And you need to make sure you talk openly about it with a lot of different folks, probably legal folks within your organization to make sure as well. So I guess that's my short way of skirting around it, but I don't know if Derek or Preston, you have anything you want to add from your perspectives, because yours are much different than mine.
Patrick, spoken like a true underwriter. So I was, you got to be able to explain that decision. So like my background was Target, but then banking, and so I was in the compliance department. I got the compliance certifications, and it is a nightmare keeping track of all the different compliance issues in the financial institution world. And so that's why, again, like I said, I can't spend my entire day learning how generative AI is going to affect document fraud. That's why I've got to push that off to people like Dara. And in this case, you've got to find those partners. So like Airbase, we're B2B, and we tend to focus on a lot of venture funded startup companies. And so I am exposed to hundreds of different high-tech companies doing some really like bleeding edge stuff every day. And some of the things I'm seeing are those AI tools that are built to maintain that compliance, where they are going to gate off all of your data, and their, your data privacy agreements and your data processing addendums, all of those are designed with that in mind. And so again, find the right partner. If you and your company, that's outside of your scope, then find the partner, make sure you've got those legal protections, make sure that you have a full understanding of how the data will be used, and then also set those guidelines. It's too easy for I was just talking to a friend of mine. She had to write a review of an employee, and so she asked ChatGPT for the answer. She said, here, ChatGPT, write that. How would you write this? That's okay, unless there's personal information in there. Then you don't know where it's going. So set those guidelines with your employees, and if they really want a tool, then you may have to buy it to prevent them from just circumventing any controls you may have. So find the partners, set the guidelines, and just know it's coming. You're going to have to adapt to it.
Thanks, Preston. So we did not plan to run out of time. That's why we prepared a slide for everybody. There's three key takeaways, but also we're going to share the slides. So we got a lot of questions, which are great. That's why here you find some, again, summarized comments, takeaways from the experts. And also don't want to hide the answer of the poll. So the winner is with 38% regarding the AI agents, maybe, but I need to learn more. And number two is, yes, I would like to see a demo of an AI agent in action. Again, it shows it's interesting, but not everybody is really using these tools today and still need to figure out how to get started. And that also shows this interest of this topic. And also a big thank you to our panelists today. I think it was great having you here today. I feel we could speak for another hour, going through a lot of interesting topics. So a big thank you to Patrick for being here today, sharing your learning, sharing your perspective. Same to Preston, thanks a lot for being here and giving your comments and answering the chat. Thanks, Derek, for also preparing the report. So I shared the link as a handout, or the document as a handout. So it's like a few pages. So you have to take some time to really go through. There are a lot of numbers, which are good. And you can also do some benchmarking, getting some ideas how you potentially perform against others. If you want to learn more, reach out to Derek. If you want to get more insights, reach out to us at About Fraud. We can also connect you to Patrick or Preston anytime if someone wants to learn more. Cool. I mean, the hour's over. We want to respect the time of everybody. So again, thank you for everybody for being here today. Thank you for being so active. So I really appreciate that you took the housekeeping rule very close to your heart and asking questions and sharing your thoughts. So thanks a lot to everybody. See you next time.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks.